breaking news. Adam Schefter here to get us up to speed on all of it. Adam, let's begin with the latest on Max Crosby.
Well, Laura, in a long line of pass rushers that are expected to be paid this offseason, Max Crosby kicked off the party today, becoming the highest paid non-quarterback in NFL history at an average of $35.5 million a year. That should end any speculation about a Max Crosby trade. He's staying in Las Vegas. But DK Metcalf could be traded. He requested a trade today from the Seattle Seahawks as he's got 1 year left on his contract. He's looking for a new deal. He's looking to play for a contender. Seattle is open to talking to other teams, and it's not out of the realm of possibility that he could be dealt here in the coming days. Meanwhile, the Seahawks did move on from another highly popular and productive wide receiver, Tyler Lockett, one of the most accomplished players in team history with character to match, is going to be released by the Seattle Seahawks. He is now a free agent, free to sign anywhere. The one team I would watch is the Las Vegas Raiders with Pete Carroll as their head coach. And the Kansas City Chiefs agreed to send their Pro Bowl offensive lineman Joe Thuney to the Chicago Bears in exchange for a fourth-round draft pick in 2026. That means the Bears now have agreed to acquire two veteran offensive linemen, Joe Thuney and Jonah Jackson. The past 2 days, they are prioritizing protecting Caleb Williams. And the Philadelphia Eagles wound up re-signing the linebacker and free agent that they really wanted back in Philadelphia, Zach Baun, a 3-year, $51 million contract to return to Philadelphia, coming off a year in which he was All-Pro, helped the Eagles get to and win the Super Bowl. And now Zach Baun, 1 year after he signed a low deal after he played in New Orleans with the Philadelphia Eagles, has cashed in and become one of the highest paid linebackers in the National Football League.
Yeah, it's something that Howie Roseman hasn't historically done, but again, this guy is just cooking already. We haven't even fully hit free agency. The Eagles finished last year's postseason with 16 sacks and 13 takeaways. Philly became the fifth team with at least 15 sacks and 10 takeaways in a single postseason since 1963, when team sacks were first tracked. No surprise, 4 of those 5 teams won the Super Bowl. We're glad you're with us today. As I said, a ton of news. Adam Schefter with us throughout. Dan Graziano joining us as well, and we'll be joined by others throughout. I'll start with you, Graz. We've talked about the way that Howie Roseman seems to always figure this out and be a step ahead of others. In this particular case, what do you think about the Eagles prioritizing getting Zach Baun done first?
Yeah, Laura, I mean, you mentioned it. They don't tend to pay linebackers historically. They don't tend to pay running backs historically. But this is an example of Howie Roseman's approach to roster building that has resulted in a Super Bowl title here most recently. Zach Baun is a player that defensive coordinator Vic Fangio identified as someone who could be a huge and important fit in his defense when they were looking at players last offseason. And he was correct, and it paid off with a Super Bowl title. So they reward him with the top-of-the-market linebacker deal because they view him not as a linebacker as much as the engine of a Super Bowl champion offense, which is exactly what he was. Saquon Barkley, Howie Roseman did not view him as a running back, viewed him as an explosive playmaker at a position that doesn't come with the cost or the high variance of, say, wide receiver. And as a result, Saquon Barkley was everything the Eagles hoped he would be and more. So when you look at the Eagles' defensive free agents, Zach Baun, Milton Williams, Josh Sweat, those two guys up front, the way they've drafted in recent years, they feel like they have replacements for them. They didn't feel like they had somebody that could come in and do what Zach Baun did, so he was the priority in free agency.
And think about this, Dan. He signed a 1 year, $3.5 million deal with the Eagles just over a year ago. And a year later becomes one of the highest paid linebackers in football. And I think that this deal today speaks to the Eagles' priorities because 24 hours earlier, they make Saquon Barkley the highest paid running back in football. 24 hours later, they get a deal done with the one free agent that they clearly were prioritizing here to bring back to Philadelphia in Zach Baun. I think that they've resigned themselves to the fact that Josh Sweat is going to go elsewhere. Milton Williams is going to go elsewhere. Not that they don't want both players. They'd love to have both back. but you can't afford to pay everybody in today's day and age, especially coming off a Super Bowl victory, which is why all this conversation and speculation about Myles Garrett to Philadelphia doesn't make a whole lot of sense at this time. As Sean McVay said this week, there are no absolutes at this time of the year, but it's hard to imagine that the Eagles could come up with a plan and a way to acquire Myles Garrett when they're busy re-signing Saquon Barkley and re-signing Zach Baun and trying to keep that roster where it needs to be to defend the Super Bowl title that they won this past season.
Yeah, Adam, even with an increased salary cap, there's only so much money to go around. And again, it's worth reminding people that the Browns still have said they're not trading Myles Garrett. So back to another of our top stories with Max Crosby becoming the highest paid non-quarterback in NFL history. Crosby has been one of the most dominant pass rushers in his career. He has 324 pressures, 40 more than any other player since his rookie season in 2019. That would be Nick Bosa, by the way, with 284. So, Graz, a huge payday for Max Crosby. What do you think this tells you about what they're doing in Vegas, their priorities, especially as we look ahead to free agency and the draft?
You know, you bring in Pete Carroll as head coach. One of the priorities is going to be setting the culture, right? And Max Crosby is a guy who has been Mr. Raider, has been a high-level performer for them, has been somebody that the fans and the front office and various coaching staffs have embraced as one of their very best players. And so not knowing what's going to happen at quarterback, not knowing what's going to happen with other parts of the roster, Raiders make a move to lock up one of the things they know they can count on, which is one of the dominant edge rushers in the league and a player that is very comfortable and very happy there, wanted to stay there. No more questions about can you get Max Crosby in a trade. He is a Raider, and they wanted him to stay a Raider no matter what else they did with that roster.
Well, Dan, it's funny you bring that up, right? That Max Crosby staying a Raider. I remember Mark Davis sending me an email last fall saying, we are not trading Max Crosby, exclamation, 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 exclamation. He couldn't have been any more emphatic. And today he put his money where his mouth was, because when you do a deal like this, that says you really are not trading Max Crosby this offseason. And all the other pass rushers that are out there are all taking notes on this deal. Trey Hendrickson, Myles Garrett, TJ Watt, Micah Parsons, Aiden Hutchinson. A couple of years ago, we had the offseason of the quarterback deal, and now we are looking at an offseason in which there are an abundance of available wide receivers, which we'll get into in the show, and there are any number of outstanding pass rushers that are going to get paid this offseason. But Max Crosby started it out becoming the highest paid